Praharsha Shikrada Gandho, Gadur Dehasya Kandada, Krodho, Viryam Abirutvam Ashtau Madaguna Smrita, which basically defines 8 different characters of musk that a bull elephant would express or exhibit. And that's exactly what centuries later Dr. Joyce Poll has defined, which basically means that, there was this information that was already available in historic Indian science that a lot of us actually overlooked, and the Western world had to bring it back to us in the form of such fantastic research.
How do you recognize an elephant?
I think after a point of time, when you start seeing the faces of the elephant, you start recognizing them
like
quickly,
humans.
But the easiest and standardized way of identifying an elephant is by looking at the ear folds.
What is happening to the elephant population? Is everything normal, or we should just not worry about it? And if there is anything alarming, what is it and what can be done?
I think we are still not in a comfortable position to actually talk about absolute elephant numbers, because
if there was one thing, like, this is the biggest learning of my PhD.
The take home of the PhD that I had, yes.
How did Kartiki get in touch with you? How did this film happen? And
so in 2018, this Nature in Focus festival that happens in
yes.
Bangalore.
Let's say if I go back to Raghu, will he recognize me?
Elephants do remember, yes. Like, for instance, even though Bowman's not taking care of Raghu still recognizes Bowman because he remembers Bowman.
But then why do these accidents happen?
Like I said, we can jot down 100 things about an elephant that we know about and be 100% sure that, okay, I know about elephants, so this is all I had to know. The very next day, the 101st thing would happen, and that would have been totally unpredictable, which could cost your life.
What, according to you, is the most pressing concern when it comes to perception towards the elephants from people?
I'll split my answer into 2 parts. One is,
welcome guys to Moving Forests. Today we are with Dr. Sreedhar Vijayakrishnan. I am Keshav Sharma, your host for the show, and every fortnight I interview prominent and inspiring personalities from the wildlife space to share all the well-kept secrets of what drives them and what makes their connect with nature. During my conversations, I try to look for some interesting stories that make you fall in love with the natural world all over again. It is an honor to introduce you to one of the most talented and passionate wildlife biologists that I know. Dr. Sreedhar is all of 33 years, and he was a scientific advisor for the Oscar-winning The Elephant Whisperers. That's how I got to know him. There is good reason behind that. He has been living with the elephants since the age of 2. And by all estimates, he knows more about the elephants than 99.9% of the people living on the planet. So without further ado, Dr. Sreedhar Vijayakrishnan, welcome to the show.
thank you, Keshav. It's fantastic to be part of this wonderful podcast, The Moving Forests, and thank you once again for welcoming me to be on this show. Firstly, I guess nobody ever knows even 99% about elephants because they're a complex species and we're learning every day. So it's a vast ocean, and I'm still a child who's at the shore trying to see if I can take my few steps inside the ocean without getting drowned. And I'm still a learner because my mentors have taught me, you make a list of 100 things that the elephants do, and the very next day you will see that the elephant's actually doing the 101st thing. So every single day is a new day in our learning life, and some new thing or the other is taught and learned every day.
I'm sure, but what I said was that maybe you know more than 99.9% of the people about the elephants. I didn't say that you know everything about the elephant. Of course, we don't know everything about the elephant. But I should thank you because you agreed to come on the podcast on such a short notice. We reconnected yesterday because of the ceremony. And I'm really grateful to you because you took the time out from whatever time you got to be with your partner because you're on a project and you live in a different country. And you came to India just for the ceremony yesterday. And you are here. So I am grateful to you. And it only goes to show how committed you are to what you do. Because otherwise, I don't know if I would agree to come on a podcast on such a short notice if I was on this vacation mindset. But you never even thought twice. You said, why not? Let's do it. So yeah, I'm thankful to you for that.
It's a pleasure because my work life and my personal life are largely, in some sense, decided, or what do I say? My personal life and my professional life are entwined with elephants in more ways than one, and I can never say no to something that has to do with elephants. So when you said let's do a podcast about elephants, there's no way I would have said no to it.
And I can't tell you how excited I am. I did know about you because when I met Kartiki for the first time, and she would keep telling me that Sreedhar is coming for the shoot. And for the entire leg of the first phase, you never could make it.
Right.
But, she would always share some interesting snippets. Oh, do you know that elephants never forget anything? And then she would come up with something else that, they can go back to places where they've gone like 60, 70 years before, and they would remember it. So, and all of these facts were coming to her from you. And then you were also sharing some interesting stats because as Indians, we think that, oh, elephant is something that we worship. And we never think that such a species can be on the verge of extinction. But there were some really fascinating statistics that I got to know from her through you, which were really shocking. So today, let's talk about all that. Let's talk about elephants' behavior and what are the things that we should really focus on. But before that, I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us something that happened to you in your childhood because of which you are where you are today.
When I spoke to you earlier, I was mentioning how I've been passionate about elephants ever since I can remember. And that's where it all began because my father, my paternal family and extended family and so on were deeply passionate about the species. We've had elephants in our family.
Wow.
And they've all shared special bonds with individual elephants. And, if you look at it from ecology perspective, very often people tend to look at them as species. But when it comes to elephants, one has to be careful about individual idiosyncrasies, which I will, of course, be talking about later when we speak about elephant behavior in particular. But this importance of individual variation, individual idiosyncrasy and all got ingrained into my mind as a young boy because I knew elephants as Neelakantan or Shekaran or Kannan and so on.
But these are the names of the elephants.
Names of the elephants and what each of their personalities were. So just like how you would describe human personalities as being bold, as being introvert and so on, we knew each individual elephant personalities and what their particular behaviors were, what their unpredictabilities could possibly be, and so on. So my father taught me my basic lessons about elephants when I was a child. Unfortunately, I lost him at a very young age. And ever since then, my family did continue to nurture my passion for the species. So that is what has really brought me all this way. And there's nothing that I wanted to do in life other than follow the elephants and learn about their ways, both in the wild and in captivity. And I didn't have to think twice before choosing a career in forestry and wildlife biology because it was all elephant-driven career path, not the other way around where I chose ecology and then I got interested in a particular
Let's break
species.
It down. How? Like you were young and like you said, ever since you remember, you were with the elephant. So you were 3 years old. Then what happened?
I don't have a vivid memory of this, but my mother still says that there used to be an elephant in our neighborhood.
What do you mean by neighborhood? You have like in cities, I can't really imagine having an elephant in the neighborhood. Where were you?
So I grew up in this quaint little town called Calicut in northern Kerala, and our neighborhood temple had an elephant who unfortunately was shot dead for being mischievous when he was about 22 years old. I was 2 years old then. And my mother still vividly remembers that when I started walking as a child, every time I heard the bells or the chains clinking outside our yard, I would run to the main gate to catch a glimpse of the elephant walking past our house. I always had this love for the animal or curiosity at that age, I suppose. So our neighborhood temples always used to have elephants for festivals and my exposure to elephants as a child was always in captivity, not in zoos, but in temples primarily. And the interesting thing was also that the mahouts then were extremely knowledgeable compared to today's, and they were happy sharing information. Even as a child, they had no inhibitions in sharing the most intricate technical details about the species. No matter how complex it is, they would break it down to the simplest of languages.
For example?
So, for instance, I knew about must, which is a physiological phenomenon in male elephants where their testosterone levels are higher in concentrations, and it's in some sense associated with reproductive behavior in male elephants. I knew about musk when probably I was like 5 years old. And if you actually look at it, it's one of the most complex phenomenons in the biology or the physiology of the species. But in the most simple technical terms, I knew what it meant when an elephant came into madam, as it is commonly called. And later on, of course, as I grew up, I knew more and more about, like, of course, at that age, I didn't know what testosterone was or what testosterone concentrations meant. But I knew that there were unpredictabilities associated with this particular phenomenon in the behavior of the animal. And that actually made human elephant bond complex when the animal came into must.
So they would become more aggressive.
They would become unpredictable. And usually, when in the wild, they tend to be aggressive towards other males. Perhaps not aggressive, I would call it as dominance, where they're signaling dominance in the process of sexual selection, where they're all in search of mates. And it's only through dominance establishment they can actually make sure they have access to the cycling female, which is their potential mate.
So then what happens, especially with those elephants which are in captivity when they are unpredictable? How did these mahouts tame them or like manage them?
So historically, the must management practices have been different in different communities. In temple elephants, for instance, the typical practice is to tether them for prolonged periods until the elephant's must is completely seized, which is usually about 90 to 120 days. And during that time, the interactions, physical interactions, wherein the mahout would approach the animal, touch it, or command it, will be very limited. Because the elephant usually tends to have an aversion towards its mahouts during that period. Because again, what's really interesting to note at this when we talk about must or when we talk about dominance in elephants is that the whole establishment of a contact or an association between elephants and mahouts is dominance based. So the mahout has to establish to the elephant that I am more dominant than you. And that's how the mahout always is able to take control of the animal. Now, when it comes to must, or when the animal comes into must period, there are good chances of role reversal where the elephant's actually trying to signal its dominance to the mahout back. This is also the time when unfortunate casualties happen in captivity. But then there are also other communities, like in the forest camps, for instance, where right from the early days, when the onset of must, when the elephants reach puberty and when the elephants start getting must when they're about, say, 18 to 20 years of age, their handling continues to be that of normal days. And as a result, even in peak must, mahouts are able to take care of elephants. And this is something that you would mostly see only in forest camps.
And how do they manage it there? What is different?
There's nothing really different there, because there I feel, in addition to the dominance establishment between the elephant and the mahout, or the mahout establishing his dominance over the elephant, there's also a bonding that happens wherein there's less aggression. But fundamentally, there's also one huge difference there, which is that in temple conditions, whether we like it or not, elephants have to be kept for prolonged confinement because of limited space and other resources. As opposed to that, in forest camps, elephants are kept in semi-wild conditions where they are let out for free ranging in the wild. They have access to mates. So irrespective of whether they are in captivity or not, they are still living lives that are relatively closer to their normal lives in the wild otherwise. So I think that also makes a huge difference in terms of their behavior.
The reason for an elephant in the temple to get irritated, the reasons are far more.
Absolutely.
They don't like, I've heard that they also don't like the surface, the cement which is under their feet. They
preferably they like muddy or
grass or
gravel or soil surfaces. And not always we have it as cement. Cement's mostly in really confined temples, and like in Tamil Nadu, in temples in Tamil Nadu, you would see elephants in cement surfaces for prolonged periods. In Kerala, they are mostly in sandy, because again, sand drains out water better. Tethering sites are mostly filled with sand, because it's a desiccant also, so there's less moisture conditions, thereby preventing fungal infections to the foot and so on.
So what is your view on these elephants being kept in captivity at the temples? Because I've heard, like, recently it's not allowed at most places, and those who were in captivity, they are being released. What do you think? Should they be released? And like, what is your view, since you come from that part of the country? What do people feel, and what is your view since you've been studying elephants for so long?
See, this is a centuries old practice to have elephants at temples, but it's not as old as the association between elephants and humans in captivity otherwise. Like, for instance, elephants were war animals at one point of time. Later on, they became draft animals where they were being used for logging and, timber hauling and transportation and so on. The practice of keeping elephants in temples came much later. And that's something we found through our research. We did a lot of archival research to understand the historicity of these practices of keeping elephants in temples. And some of the oldest historical evidence that we could trace back actually came from the 16th and 17th centuries. But coming back to your question about elephants in captivity in temples, I think the conditions in which elephants are kept in temples are deteriorating by day. And there's been tremendous amount of change in terms of skills of mahouts, skills and knowledge of mahouts from yesteryears to today. Because in the past, the mahouts actually came from traditional communities who have had associations with elephants. And it was a trade, or it was a profession that was transferred on to future generations by eldermost members of families. And as a result, there was a lot of cultural transfer of knowledge and information wherein people who would take charge as apprentices to mahouts would slowly learn the do's and don'ts of this practice, as opposed to today where anybody can just be a mahout, get attracted because of all the money minting that's involved with this particular. I mean, it's become a commercial.
You mean anyone? Is there a course or something that they can do to become a mahout, or like, can I become a mahout?
So there is a training program that's actually now presently run by the Kerala Forest Department, for example. But it's a 3-day program, and they issue a license, a mahout license at the end of the program.
Just 3 days.
Just 3 days, exactly. So that's where the tricky part comes in, because that's not enough time for someone to actually know about elephants. And that shouldn't be the criteria with which one decides whether a person can be a mahout or not.
And you've been studying for the last 31 years, and you were saying that you don't know enough.
No, so... Yeah, I mean, I've been studying elephants out in the wild for... This is the 15th year of studying elephants out in the wild. But yeah, I've been with elephants.
Had exposure with the elephants for the last.
Yeah.
Like the things that you spoke about, is it must or musk?
It's must.
M-U-S-T.
T-H.
T-H. Must. Okay. So you knew about this when you were very young, like I think 4 or 5 years old.
That's right. Yeah.
Let's go back to your childhood.
Okay.
So we deviated a little bit, but that's all right, because that's all part of the story. So what happened once you got to know that, there is this elephant and you were attracted to the bell and you would just go and watch and observe and talk to the mahouts? After that, what happened?
So, like I said, I started growing up hearing elephant tales, all that. So even my bedtime stories were mostly about elephants. And when I grew up, I also had exposure to elephants who used to be tied up in our backyards. Mahouts would, use our house as a pit stop when they're traveling from one place to the other. And they would
As a pit stop for the elephant to rest, or
for the elephant to rest. So they would leave the elephant there for a few days. Nice. Typically every elephant has 3 mahouts. So one person would stay back while the other 2 would go home and take a break and come back, and so they would take turns doing that.
So you had a place where elephants could stay?
Yeah, I mean, our yard was big enough to actually house elephants.
That is so cool, man. I want to go and see how is it still there like that?
No, I mean, those are all our old properties which we disposed of at a later stage. But our ancestral houses and all are still there where my relatives stay. There are places even now where we can still house elephants.
You had no choice but to fall in love with the elephants. Because,
absolutely.
We watch elephants in the movies and TVs and we love them so much. And you as a child had the privilege of, serving your house as a pit stop for elephants. So do you remember how many elephants would you have housed when you were a kid?
This was mostly during summer, because the summer is also the festival season in Kerala. And back then, elephants never used to be transported by trucks. So today, if you come to Kerala, you can actually see elephants being shuttled along the highways in trucks. But back then, they used to be shuttled from one place to the other by foot, which means they have to take multiple pit stops. So for instance, if they have to travel 100 kilometers, that would mean they have to take about 4 to 5 days walking about 20 kilometers a day. So which means there are 5 distinct pit stops that they would have identified well in advance. And this is a practice that's been going on for ages. So my grandmother had vast extents of paddy fields and paddy drying yards and granaries associated with it, where they used to bring elephants. And at any given point of time during my father's childhood days, for instance, there used to be 5 or 6 elephants together at one time. That had changed by the time, I was a child. We had about 2 to 3 elephants coming once in a while. But again, those were days of celebration, because even if you have schools, so I would bunk schools for a few days. If they're going to stay only for 3 or 4 days, I would bunk schools on those days. Or, not a great advice to do, give people, but
yeah, if you were going to have your career with the elephants, why not? You're studying.
Yeah. So my initial days, I actually wanted to be a vet, because I thought the vets got the most amount of time with elephants after mahots, because they had to take care of the needs of the elephants. But then I realized later on, much later in my career, when I was like high school, I realized that more than vets, there are wildlife biologists who actually get to study them in the wild. And the vets' exposure to wild elephants is very limited to certain circumstances where they have to treat the animals, for instance, as opposed to the wildlife biologists who actually follow the elephant day in and day out, trying to understand what the elephant's doing, where the elephant's going, what the elephant's feeding on, who he or she is interacting with, and so on. So it's basically documenting the entire lives of the species, which I found more exciting. And that was also the time I also got hold of a few books. There was J.C. Daniels' Natural History of the Asian Elephant. There was Professor Raman Sukumar's Elephant Days and Nights. So there were a few books that actually really inspired me to pursue a career.
And this was around what age?
This was when I was in about 15, 16 years old. But that was also the time, there was this little bit of like small amount of thought that crept in where I wanted to be a mahout.
I read an article where they've introduced you as a mahout who became a biologist. So I was going to ask you that you were a mahout as well.
Like I said, my summer holidays, which is like 2.5 months every year, was spent with the mahouts. So I would learn from them about different things. And the graduation at that point of time was to actually let the mahouts, let you sit on top of the elephant and control the elephant. So sometimes as a really small child, when I wanted to sit atop an elephant, the mahout would sit and then make you sit with the person, and he would be holding you so that you don't fall down. But the level where you feel so happy and excited is when you're on your own.
You're driving it alone.
Yeah, you're driving, you're doing the clutch, brake, accelerator, everything on top of the elephant. And that to me happened when I was about 13, 14 years old, where mahouts were really confident to let me sit alone on top. And they knew that I had slowly started learning all the foot commands. So there's also foot commands. So the way in which you move your toe, your heel, your ankle, everything defines whatever the elephant's doing down. So you don't have to give vocal commands.
Is it universal?
It's not universal. It's different across different communities. There are a lot of similarities, for instance, between the Malayali mahouts in Kerala and the Malasar mahouts in the Anamalai Hills. So the Tamil Nadu and Kerala elephant practices are somewhat similar, at least in terms of the foot commands and all. But in some places, like in northern parts of the country, the foot commands are on the forehead of the elephant, where the mahout would be sitting on top of the ambari or a seat.
Right on top of the head.
Yeah, right on top of the head, like you would see in some of these safari parks in central India. And their foot commands are actually on the forehead of the animal, as opposed to behind the ears in case of Kerala and Tamil Nadu.
I've seen it. In Tamil Nadu, it's just behind the ears or under the ears.
Yes, that's right.
Very interesting. So by the age of 13 or 14, whenever the elephant would come to your place, even if it is an elephant that you've never seen before, you were able to command that elephant.
No, so that's something I also was taught as a child. So one of the first things my father taught me was elephants can always be unpredictable. They're not domestic animals. They are wild-caught, tamed animals, which means you can never take the wild out of the animal. So unless or otherwise you knew the personalities of the animal, you have spent time with the animal, you should never take chances with an individual, is what my father taught me as a young boy. And that's something I've always kept in my mind. Even today, if I don't know an elephant in captivity, if I haven't spent much time with him or her, and if I haven't really interacted with the mahout to know the whereabouts of the animal for a prolonged period of time, I really don't take chances and, make quick approaches.
What is the appropriate amount of time? Or when do you know that you're more comfortable around the elephant?
I think it's very difficult to actually define a thumb rule in that sense, because it's highly variable across individuals. There are some individuals whom you can never learn. For instance, there was this very famous elephant in Kerala called Tiruvambadi Kuttishankaran. And Kuttishankaran for the longest time was considered very notorious because of his unpredictable behavior. And his mahout, late Narayanan, I would say he was one of the best mahouts in the country, because he was able to manage even the most problematic of animals that have created lots of human casualties and damages and losses and so on, with very minimal interventions, with very minimal restraints, and absolutely minimal punishment and so on. And Narayanan lost his life to Kuttishankaran because of one of those unpredictable moments. And if I am to borrow Narayanan's words from an interview that he gave long back, how much of your time you spend with an animal, there are certain individuals you can never learn completely. And they will have certain cards or certain tricks up under their sleeve that can cost you your life. So never take chances with an elephant. So there were a few individual elephants when I grew up. So for instance, there was this elephant called Kannan, who's still alive, who was a regular in our temple. And Kannan was very friendly, and most importantly, even if the mahout takes off all the chains and lets him pass, he knew where exactly to walk towards the kitchen side of our house because he knew he would get treats there. So there were a few individuals with whom we used to have special bonds with like that. And other than that, it wasn't a general thing to actually interact with all elephants.
Okay, so what happened after 15 years of age when you realized that, you can become a biologist?
I did my 11th and 12th grade. After my 12th grade was when I actually went and finally became a mahout full time. I spent a few weeks almost having full controls of an elephant, taking charge of the elephant as a mahout. Of course, I was the assistant.
This was in a wildlife sanctuary or?
No, this was in a private captive elephant establishment. And I used to take with the other boy who was working with me then. We were almost at the same age. And the two of us used to take the elephant to different festivals, crowded places, and so on. And it was interesting because the elephant was also one of those, quote unquote, notorious individuals from then. But we used to have a special bond with that animal.
What was his name? Do you remember?
His name was Aravindan.
Aravindan.
And
where is he now?
He's no more. He died of, illnesses. And it was interesting because I used to hear a lot of things about the elephant before I became a mahout, but the behavior I sort of experienced firsthand as the mahout of that individual was completely different from what I had heard otherwise. He used to have a special bond that you would even want a share of food when the mahout's actually having his meal. He would walk up to the mahout and ask for a share of the meal. So every time I would have, say idlis, he would want a couple of idlis from my lunchbox.
It's like you have pets at home.
Yeah. It was almost like having a pet in all senses. And those few days with him were actually very exciting. This was during my break after my 12th grade, and then I had to go to college, and I had chosen forestry. So when I chose forestry, a lot of people thought I'm going to get trained as a forester and get into the Indian Forest Services. But, again, when I thought of the service, I did think of the services, I shouldn't deny that, but I thought the services would mostly limit myself to an office position where I have to do more administrative jobs rather than getting to spend more time on field following elephants, which I think is right because a lot of my friends are in the services who do excellent jobs as administrators, but often also mention that their time they spend on field is very limited compared to what wildlife biologists otherwise would spend. The most exciting thing to me about the forest college was that the college was situated right inside a reserve forest. It was a 500-acre campus situated inside a reserve forest. So we would have elephants walking past our
Where was this?
men's hostel. So this was in Mettupalayam near Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu. And we would have elephants coming into the water trough where we would wash clothes in the hostel and so on. So my exposure with wild elephants began since then on a regular basis, I would say. I mean, I've seen elephants in the wild even before that, but mostly as a tourist. And
these were like not captive elephants.
These are absolutely wild elephants, free roaming.
And you were not scared?
There was nothing to be scared about elephants. It's all about being careful and being cautious around them and then maintain your safe distance. That's the key. So I started following elephants. So we used to have... like I said, the forestry college in some sense trains students to be forest service officers, which also meant that it had all the paraphernalia of a training academy. So we would have mandatory PE sessions, the physical education sessions, which I used to skip all the time.
Why?
Because the PE sessions used to be in the evening hours, and that was the time when elephants would come to water holes. So I would skip PE sessions and then go into the forest.
Watch the elephant.
So out of the 500 acres, only about 20 acres was built up area. The rest was all forest, contiguous with the larger Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So we had elephants year round.
So your college was like a corridor?
It was near a corridor. Not exactly a corridor. It was part of an elephant habitat. to be precise.
So you were in the elephant area, basically.
Yes, we were in the elephant area. That's right. So that actually gave me a lot of opportunities to start following elephants and, learning about what they're doing at water holes, how they interact with each other and so on. But it was all very naive because, like I said, I never knew who Gene Altman was. I never knew what behavioral sampling was about. So Gene Altman actually devised the strategies for behavioral sampling of elephants or of animals in the wild. I never knew any of that. And it was very crude in the sense that I would just write down what the animal's doing. I would, and of course, I could. My experience with captive elephants really helped me learn identification of elephants in the wild, which basically made individual identification each group earlier easy. And then I would note down what individual A is doing, what individual B is doing. And every time I saw those individuals again, like for instance, they would be gone for a few days and
so
they
you would
come
manually
back.
write it in your notebook?
I would write down in small notepads.
And keep track of it.
So
have you digitized it now, or is it those notes are gone, or are they still there?
I lost some of the notes when we were, shifting houses, but most of my other notes are still there where, I know on what dates I saw what individual and so on.
And you know their names.
And I know their names.
And you will be able to recognize them, let's say, if you meet them now after 10 years.
Yeah. So that's
how do you recognize an elephant?
I think after a point of time when you start seeing the faces of the elephant, you start recognizing them
like
quickly,
humans.
But the easiest and standardized way of identifying an elephant is by looking at the ear folds, the primary and secondary ear folds. So the ear starts folding, like our ear, for instance. Ear starts folding at a certain age for elephants. So you look at the ear fold patterns, it's not the same for two individuals. If they are males, tusked males, you can look at the tusk patterns. No two elephants have the same tusk patterns. No two elephants have the same tail patterns. So you look at certain physical features like these and identify individual elephants.
Very interesting. So then you started studying biology in Tamil Nadu, and then after that...
So then a few years later, we were on this field trip to Mudumalai, and being in forestry college, we had numerous amount of field trips, all to forested areas, to study different aspects, study plantation management, wildlife management, fire management, different aspects of forest management, to be precise. And during one of those field trips in 2010, I happened to stumble upon a person who was, so we were in Mudumalai, and we were near the Mudumalai, the Teppakad reception center, and there's this bridge that connects to the Moya Road, which also leads to the elephant camp. Next to that, there were a troop of bonnet macaques, and there was one individual, one person and his partner, who
bonnet macaque, for everyone who don't know what this species is, is a monkey.
The common monkey is
common monkey.
They're called the bonnet macaques. And there was one person who was just following these bonnet macaques wherever they went, and he was making small notes. So a friend of mine from my class and I were really curious as to what this gentleman was doing, and the lady. So we walked up to him and we got introduced, and he introduced himself as Professor Anindya Sinha. And he said he was studying the behavior of bonnet macaques, and that he's been studying those particular troops for about 15-20 years then. So it was very exciting, and unlike many people whom you would meet for the first time, he was so friendly and jovial that he actually shared his number and told me that if I'm really excited to hear that you're following elephants and then looking at their behavior, if you want to talk more about elephant behavior, do reach out and stay in touch with me. And
so this person was not only studying monkeys, he was studying elephants as well, or
no? So he was a behavioral ecologist who studies animal behavior.
Okay.
But he was not into animal behavior. I mean, elephant behavior yet. Then he was studying primate behavior. But he told me that if you want to talk about animal behavior, you can always reach out to me. Ever since then, I've been dropping these small, short messages
to him.
So back then it was
even now.
Back then it was SMS. And I would send him an SMS saying individual A is actually headbutting individual B. Individual B has trunk in individual C's mouth. What does that indicate? And he very gently would take the time, very patiently would take the time and explain what each of these behavior would potentially mean and what I should infer from these behaviors out in the wild.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So couple of years later, in 2012, I finished my bachelor's. That was a time when a lot of people wanted me to decide between the Indian Forest Services.
Now, since you're saying this, I'm just thinking that, when we look at wildlife, we never look at it that way.
Yeah.
Because we know what we are doing. If I'm talking to you like this means that I'm trying to express something, or if
Right.
I feel it and I want to tell you. But we never look at animals and think all this. So,
Yeah, I think which is why I think behavioral ecology is the most exciting field in ecology, because you basically get to translate what an animal is trying to communicate. Say, for instance, so in my Instagram handle, when I post a picture, I usually describe what particular behavior the animal is indulged in that picture, because I want people to start knowing. Because if you actually see, a lot of people think that an elephant raising its trunk is waving at the person. But in most cases, when an elephant's raising its trunk, it's actually pointing it in a particular direction and picking scent of what is coming forth. Like, for instance, I had this video of an elephant walking towards my camera with its trunk tip curled upwards. Trunk was lying as normal, but the trunk tip was curving upwards, outwards. So that's typical way in which a musk male would, pick scent of potential mates or other males in the area.
So what did you do?
So on.
Did you start sprinting?
No, I mean,
sprint from there.
I took the whole video sequence until the elephant actually got really close and you walked away. The interesting thing is,
So you should
a lot of
typically,
people,
if they do this, then you should don't go close to them. Basically, that's what.
I mean, ideally, you should
inferred.
never go close to an elephant, irrespective of what the animal is doing. A safe distance of 50 meters or more is always advisable. I've got scarily close with elephants in multiple occasions, but those are all things that would be labeled as do not try this at home.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
But first you finish your story. Yeah. And then
So then
you met this gentleman and
yeah,
then you
so a couple of years later in 2012, I was just finishing my bachelor's, and that was a time when people wanted me to decide between choosing a career in research versus the Indian Forest Services. I of course decided I wanted a career in research, and then I gave the entrance test to the National Center for Biological Sciences, which offers a master's, and thankfully I made it through the entrance and 2 rounds of interviews and got into the program. That was when it became more formal, where I was getting trained to study wild animals, because otherwise in forestry we just had 2 papers on wildlife biology, which was mostly broad scale things, and this was getting into really fine scale of understanding what ecology was about at different scales and so on. Interestingly, Professor Sinha, whom I saw watching macaques, was one of the faculty there.
Oh.
And he was teaching behavioral ecology. I was pretty sure that I wanted to work with him for my master's dissertation. So for master's dissertation, you have to choose one mentor or one guide or supervisor who would guide you through the master's thesis. It's almost like a PhD thesis, but shorter in duration and length. So for my master's, I was very sure that I wanted to do it on elephant behavior. That is also the time when I was also reading up a lot about elephant stress, for instance, where I was reading about elephants getting killed in large numbers in Pilanesberg and the orphans getting post-traumatic stress disorder and some of them going havoc and killing rhinos because of their behavioral abnormalities and so on. So I felt...
this was where?
In Pilanesberg in Africa. I felt in today's context where elephants and humans share space, spatially and temporally in many landscapes, that also meant there would be inevitable interactions with the species, leading to what broadly gets referred to as human-elephant conflict.
Yeah.
So I felt the human side of human-elephant conflict often gets studied in terms of what are the losses to people, monetary losses, crop losses, loss of lives, and so on. But seldom do we address the losses to elephants in this story. Even when we speak of it, we only speak of number of elephants that get killed because of conflict, but not really at their physiological scales about what happens to their behavior, what happens to their physiology. So
why it happens.
And why it happens. So for my master's, I looked at elephant stress by looking at hormones. So I would follow individual elephants as they navigated through human-dominated landscapes. This was in this beautiful landscape called Valparai in the Anamalai Hills in southern Western Ghats. And that was also the time I got to meet Dr. Anand Kumar, who's been doing some fantastic work for past 2 decades in the Anamalai landscape on elephants and human-elephant conflict mitigation. Some fantastic interventions through the early warning systems, which we can speak about later when we speak about conflict. My work was to follow individual elephants and record or document any kinds of interaction that they have with humans, and systematically record all behavioral responses, and subsequently also collect dung samples from them and analyze the dung samples later in laboratory for hormones. So in humans, if we have to understand if a person is stressed, you can just look at their blood pressure values, and there are multiple measures today. In elephants or in wildlife in general, the standard measure is to look at fecal glucocorticoid hormones, which are commonly called as the stress hormones. And that's what I followed, wherein I was looking at stress hormones. And one of the most important findings of our study was how the stress hormone values of elephants that lived in human-dominated landscapes were comparable with those that exclusively lived in the wild with no interaction, with rarely any interactions with elephants.
The stress level was the same.
They were same, indicating that there was some level of habituation or learning or adaptation in these elephants that are actually using these landscapes. But at the same time, these same individuals, when they were being driven using vehicles, when they were being chased using vehicles, crackers, loud noises, sirens, lights, etc., their stress hormone values were increasing by about 40 to 60%. So, which means elephants are adaptable enough to actually learn to live in a human-dominated landscapes, but negative interactions could still be detrimental to them. And if these negative interactions continue to be, thankfully these interactions were episodical, they would happen only once in a while. But if the hypothesis is that if it continues for prolonged periods of time, or let's say if it lasts for days or weeks, then it could potentially be detrimental to their overall physiology and health.
And also it will lead them to be unpredictable.
Absolutely. So that was my master's work. So like I said, from meeting Professor Sinha as a primate biologist, watching macaques in Mudamalai Tiger
having
Reserve,
him as your mentor,
having him as my mentor, our relationship then continued to my PhD as well, where I registered my PhD later on with Professor Sinha. We call him Rana fondly. So,
what was the subject of your PhD?
My PhD was in animal behavior.
For elephants or just animal
For
behavior?
Elephants.
For elephants.
The stream is animal behavior. My work was particularly on looking at social behavior in female elephants.
Female elephants, wow. Yeah. So you spent how many years doing that?
My PhD, I spent about 5 years doing my PhD. Then of course the pandemic happened in between.
So what was that, if there was one thing that really opened up a few things in your mind, or which was like, this is the biggest learning of my PhD, if there is anything that you'd like to, why am I asking this, is because this show is actually for people who may or may not know everything about wildlife, but they are just interested in knowing more. I am one of them. So I am curious to know things which can easily be related with a larger audience and may not be that technical, but something that in simple words, if they can understand, because PhD can get really technical because you've spent 5 years on one subject. But if there was something which was so simple and relatable for everyone, and that also was an eye-opener for you, what was that?
So I think the take-home of the PhD that I had was pretty similar to what many others who have done a PhD was, which is that I think at the end of the PhD, if you are left with more questions than answers, you have done a good job. Because you are so ambitious at the beginning of your PhD with so many questions in your mind, and your PhD period is to try and find answers for them. But then eventually you find out that as you unravel the responses or the answers for certain questions, you only end up with more questions than answers. That's how science works. And it's not as complex. So if you are the greatest message for me about my PhD was that if you're really passionate about what you're doing, you won't feel like 5 years have really passed.
Yeah.
So
As they say, there's this famous saying: the more you learn that you don't know anything.
absolutely. So it's called the Dunning-Kruger syndrome.
Yeah.
Where the least you know, the most confident you are.
Yeah. And the
And the more you know, the less
learn,
confident you
the
are.
less confident
Yeah.
you are. True.
One thing for me was I had to spend the first few months in Bangalore doing some desk-based coursework, following which I never went back to the institute except for my 6 monthly reporting requirements. And my institute was absolutely fine with that because they understood that mine was a field-based PhD and how important it was to spend time on field. Because if I would leave elephants for a few days, that would mean that I'm missing out on observations on those days, and I have no clue what happened on those days. So it is important that I follow these individuals on for prolonged periods of time, collect samples, do behavioral observations, so that I can link back all of this later and make it all into coherent information that would tell me something in response to the questions that I've raised as part of my PhD.
Now you finished your PhD, and around the same time you were doing your PhD around the same time.
Yes.
How did Kartiki get in touch with you? How did this film happen, and what happened?
So in 2018, this Nature in Focus festival that happens in Bangalore. And
I've seen your YouTube video and your talks with Nature in Focus.
Kalyan had invited me as a speaker at the Nature in Focus in 2018, and Kartiki was one among the audience at that event. And then I actually spoke about pretty much the same story back then, wherein I spoke about growing up with elephants and spending my time learning from mahouts than from any other books, for instance. One of the things that she really connected with was my emphasis on understanding human-elephant bonds, be it in the wild or in captivity. And she said, and then she got in touch with me right after my talk that she was planning to document the story about the bond between an orphan elephant and its caretakers in Mudumalai. Mudumalai, again, is a place close to my heart because it's the first forest I've ever been to when I was 6 months old. I have no idea. I have no remembrance of it.
6
of course.
months old.
I was 6 months when I went to Mudumalai first. There are photographs of it, but I have no remembrance whatsoever. Ever since then, we used to go to Mudumalai once in a while and spend some time at the elephant camp and in the forest. So going back to the story of human-elephant bonds in Mudumalai when Kartiki spoke about it was in some sense nostalgic to me, because going back to that camp and looking at the interactions, and it's a camp known for various things. It's one of the oldest camps in South India. It's one of the two camps where famous elephant vet Dr. Krishnamurthy has spent his lifelong taking care of these fantastic animals. So I've always had something really passionate about that landscape and the elephant camp in particular. So I was really enthralled to be a part of the story. And I was supposed to be there for the filming in 2019, but 2019 was when I was really getting into the busy, rather hectic, but of course the less glamorous part of PhD, which is the desk work, where you start collating all the data, entering it, cleaning it up, analyzing it, and then writing it all. So I couldn't make it for the schedule, the shooting schedule in 2019, and I couldn't.
But then eventually you were there.
I was there. I mean, I was part of the whole story building and other things, but I could be there for shooting only in 2020 October when I had just finished my thesis.
A lot of people, including me, I was not aware that, the numbers of elephants are decreasing so fast. And so I'd like you to share some of these statistics for the listeners' benefit. And what is your insight on what is happening to the elephant population? Is everything normal, or we should just not worry about it? And if there is anything alarming, what is it and what can be done?
I think we are still not in a comfortable position to actually talk about absolute elephant numbers, because there needs to be a lot more cleaning up in terms of the methodologies that we use for elephant population estimation. We use multiple methods which are still not standardized across landscapes. Some of the current methods that we use are still wrought with flaws. We have to really have long-term information. So, for instance, there are arguments about elephant population increasing in the last 30 years and so on. But for that, you need absolutely accurate data from 30 years before, which I don't think we have. To me, I think elephant population probably remains stable, and we have such kind of long-term information for only from select landscapes where certain organizations have been working for really long times. But from most other areas, we don't really have that information. And I think this is the time we start building long-term information from all elephant landscapes in the country, be it protected area or not. Just consider all forested landscapes where elephants are present and then take all of them into consideration and start having precise population estimates. But most importantly, what worries me is the number of elephants getting killed due to conflict. We have a fairly good number of elephants, probably about 200, 250 elephants or more. Because I don't think we really have an estimate of that either, a comprehensive estimate of that.
200 or 250 elephants getting killed
annually due to conflict. And I think the number would be greater than that, definitely not lesser. And
conflict as in getting killed by humans and not dying because of issues like electrocution or drowning.
No,
or
not getting
separated.
killed. So getting killed in the sense due to electrocution, due to poisoning,
everything,
due to railway accidents, due to highway accidents. In poaching cases, all put together, there will be more than 250 elephants getting killed annually. What is really shocking is in most of these cases they are males, because males do have this tendency to get into croplands for raiding.
Also, they wander alone, if I'm not wrong. Sometimes.
No, males actually. So again, contrary to popular beliefs, male elephants are actually social. They do form what are called bachelor groups or all-male groups and then wander in groups. But of course, they also wander alone. When all these, male elephants in their prime age are getting lost, that's something to be worried about, because you're losing some really good genes over there, which means you're in the long term also affecting the population. Like for instance, if you look at Sri Lanka, historically there was this, there was poaching for tusks, and there was also selective removal of tusked males for their cultural needs, because they've had this perahera where they take Lord Buddha's tooth relics out for a procession and so on. So they've always had preferences for tusked males.
So they would use that elephant as someone they would use in the procession.
Yeah, as a carrier of the tooth relics.
Yeah.
So historical removal of tusked male through poaching and selective capture has actually favored the genes towards tusklessness, that we actually have more Makhnas than Tuskers in Sri Lanka now.
What is the difference between Makhna and Tuskers?
So a Makhna is a tuskless male. Okay. They are males. Very often they get confused with transgenders and elephants, but they're not. They are actually males. Makhnas are actually males, except that they don't have tusks.
We have transgenders
tuskers.
in elephants as well?
No, nothing recorded so far. Like I said, there are, in Sri Lanka, because of that, tuskers are a rarity. If you see a tusker, it's a huge thing in Sri Lanka, as opposed to India, where you get to see tusked elephants quite commonly. Yeah. I would be more worried about understanding the demography of the population rather than absolute numbers, to see how many males we have to how many females. So what's the sex ratio? What's the adult female to juvenile ratio? So in a healthy population, the adult female to juvenile ratio would be 1:2, wherein every female would have a slightly older offspring and a younger offspring with her at any given point of time. But how many of our populations actually have such ideal ratios? So these are things that I would be more worried about than absolute numbers, because these are things that would, so like for instance, let's say if you have 1,000 elephants and there are only like 10 males, your population's health is something that needs to be worried about. Or let's say there are 1,000 elephants and only about 10 breeding females. That's something to be absolutely be worried about.
Yeah.
But absolute numbers, you have 1,000 elephants. 1,000 elephants is something to be happy about. But what about the future of the population? Your future of the population is dependent on these demographics, on a demographic wherein what are your birth rates, what are your death rates, what are your interbirth intervals, and so on. So in most populations where I've studied, I've seen elephants giving birth once in uh, about 4 years, 4 to 5 years. But in some populations, it could be wider intercalving intervals because of lack of resources and so on. In some populations, it could be narrower intercalving intervals because of availability of abundant resources. So these are things that needs to be studied systematically across different
What is
landscapes.
intercalving intervention?
So intercalving intervals basically
Intervals.
defines the time period between one birth and the subsequent birth of the same individual.
Okay.
Like for instance, if a female gives birth this year, the intercalving interval is the time from now to the next birth of that.
That is typically how many? What is the duration?
So some of the populations where I've studied, I've seen the intercalving interval to be about 4 to 5 years. So once in every 4 to 5 years, a female gives birth.
And when they give birth, it's one calf.
It's one calf. Twins are a rarity. And even if twin births happen, survival of both the individuals are always a tricky affair.
Also, one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of young calves are getting lost. What happens to, why is it that young calves can't be on their own? And like, is there something that we all should know? Because this film also talks about that,
Right.
The Elephant Whisperers, that calves are getting lost and now they have to have these mahouts who are taking care of the calves. And they even tried to reunite the calf back to their the wild, tried to reintroduce him and her to the wild, but they failed. And a lot of times, these calves die when they get separated from their herd. So what is the phenomena behind that? And somewhere I read that, a calf needs to be protected for almost 10 years.
Close care of these calves to ensure their survival is required at least for 5 to 6 years.
That's a long time.
That's a long
What's
time.
their normal life?
They live up to about 60, 65 years. In the wild, they would live up to 55 to 60 years.
But that's
Which
like
means
humans.
1/10 of their life, they're dependent on their mothers.
Only mothers.
Yeah. Mothers and the allo mothers, which is like their aunts.
So what happens? Like they get pregnant and then they get separated from their male partners, and then the herd of alpha female elephants.
So the males associate only during mating. Males really don't associate with herds otherwise. And then there are herds that are these social groups. So a typical family unit is basically a mother and her offspring, or dependent offspring, or slightly older offspring. And multiple such family units join what's called a group or a herd. And herds basically a stable association of multiple of these individuals and their dependent offspring.
So all female elephants?
Yes, and who are mostly related to each other. So they could be siblings, for instance. The older individuals in the group could be siblings.
And what's the normal size of this group?
It's variable. It depends on the landscape's ecological features. So in areas where you have abundant resources, you tend to observe that groups are larger because there's not enough competition really. So
let's say if we go to a wildlife sanctuary and we see a herd of elephants, mostly it will be all female, and if there is a young one, that's one of their kids, and it's a group of all female elephants.
The adults are usually
like that.
The adults are usually females. The offsprings could be male or female. Yeah.
And what happens once they turn 5 years old?
No, not 5 years. So usually the male calves, the male juveniles hang around with the herd until they are about 10 to 12 years. Sometimes younger also. And then they disperse. And they disperse and join other males of their age class or older age classes. And then start learning from them. There's a cultural transfer of knowledge happening there.
Wow.
Through bachelor groups. So they would learn from the older individuals about where to go for resources, what kind of risks to avoid, and things like that.
So interesting. And then what happens? So let's say that these male elephant is joined by another group and they are in the brotherhood now. And now they are learning the tricks of the trade. They are learning how to go, where to go, how to mate and everything else. So then what happens? Then how do they find their mates? So then, is there competition between them or there is no competition?
Yeah, I mean, the competition is what defines must, because must is a part of sexual selection.
Hmm.
So this is where we come back to the more technical side of must, wherein must actually defines sexual behavior in male Asian elephants, male elephants, both Asian and African. The hormone associated with reproductive behavior is testosterone. So when your testosterone concentrations are high, you express it through temporal discharges. So you have these temporal glands right next to the ears of, between the ears and eyes of male elephants, from which the temporal discharge, the gland starts secreting a viscous discharge, oily fluid, which is the signaling process of must. And then they also continuously dribble urine, which is of pungent odor, signaling to the other males that there is a must male
Stay
here, so
away.
you may want to stay away. So that's all part of their mate selection process. And it's interesting because there's a very interesting thing about the very interesting thing about must is that one of the earliest studies of must was by Dr. Joyce Poole in Africa, and this was in 1982. So she started her studies in late 1970s and wrote this comprehensive paper about reproductive behavior in male elephants. And she described different characters of must, about the odor, their swiftness, their dominance, and so on. So that was 40 years ago, in 1982. But what's really exciting is there's this centuries old textbook called Matangalila, which is also called the Elephant's Play. The Matangalila literally translates to elephant play, which has defined must in its 9th chapter, and defines must as, so the Sanskrit verse goes like this: Praharsha Shikrada Gandho Gadir Dehasya Kandada Krodho Viryam Abhirutvam Ashtau Madagunasmrita, which basically defines 8 different characters of must that a bull elephant would express or exhibit. And that's exactly what centuries later Dr. Joyce Poole has defined, which basically means that there was this information that was already available in historic Indian science that a lot of us actually overlooked, and the Western world had to bring it back to us in the form of such fantastic research.
Amazing. Or maybe there was a knowledge transfer in some way that we don't know.
Yeah, or which got disconnected at some point.
Which got disconnected, and maybe it was already communicated in some way, shape, or form, and then it came back to us from there. Yeah. Yesterday, when we were talking about human-animal conflict, and you mentioned that some of these places that were inhabited by elephants are now plantations. And then you casually mentioned, but an elephant will not forget. What is this phenomena of elephant not forgetting? Talk to us more about that.
See, the elephants have a fairly well-developed hippocampus, which also means they have excellent spatial memory. That means they have excellent memory of places or locations. Some of the best examples of that comes from, examples that I can recall are from my observations of wild elephants in the field. One of my early days on field, I was observing a group of elephants being chased from a plantation to the nearby forest. And the elephants had all picked pace. They were running really fast. At one point, suddenly they all slowed down and stopped because there was a bridge. So they know that bridges are unstable surfaces and they have to tread carefully on those terrains. So this older female slowed down and stopped, and used her trunk to feel the surface, slowly kept her foreleg and took a few steps, slowly walked across the bridge, crossed over, picked pace again, and then started running again.
Wow.
So there was this memory in her that there is a bridge on this road.
There was a bridge.
There was a bridge there. So she knew, these are individuals that are always using this area. So they had a clear memory that, when we walk down this road, there is a bridge, and that bridge could be an unstable surface, which means we shouldn't be running really fast over it. So likewise, I've seen several observations, like for instance, in places where they've had negative interactions, where they've been shot at, for instance, or they've been thrown firecrackers at, they tend to be more apprehensive than other places. Like, for instance, some places, they tend to be dealt with in a completely different way, where they're not being chased, where they're not being, harassed and so on. They're absolutely calm. They're so calm that, you would
even if that place has changed a little bit.
Even if that place has changed, I mean, of course, they would be wary then. If there are new, anything novel is something that the animal would be wary about. If there's a change in the environment, that the animal.
And how about humans? Let's say if I go back to Raghu, will he recognize me?
Elephants do remember, yes. If you have spent, like for instance, even though Bowman's not taking care of Raghu still recognizes Bowman because he remembers Bowman.
But then why do these accidents happen? It's just because of that phase when they become unpredictable?
Yeah, so like I said, we can jot down 100 things about an elephant that we know about and be 100% sure that, okay, I know about elephants. So this is all I had to know. The very next day, the 101st thing would happen. And that would have been totally unpredictable, which could cost your life. So that's
maybe the intention of the elephant is not to really kill you. Maybe he's just upset.
No,
or
so
he or she.
If you actually look at elephant to elephant interaction, if there's an antagonistic interaction, for instance, one elephant suddenly pushes off the other elephant. When the elephant's replicating the same thing with a human being, the human being gets killed. In the case of an elephant, it's just pushing the other elephant away. It's with the same pressure, the elephant's actually pushing away a human too. But the human gets killed because human beings can't stand that amount of pressure. So,
that's where the dynamics of human-elephant relationship come into the picture.
Absolutely. And I don't think any elephant has the intention to kill a person. It's always accident. They're trying to attack the person out of fear or in defense. But it turns fatal because the human body cannot take the pressure of an elephant body. This whole myth about elephants being bloodthirsty, and there are a lot of stories about elephants being bloodthirsty, elephants being named after terrorist leaders and things like that. That's all just too much masala and, too much of exaggeration, and it cannot be considered as a normal behavior of an elephant. If an elephant kills a person, it's an accidental encounter. It's just happened so. It's not that the elephant wanted to kill a person to, satiate its thirst for blood or anything. And unlike in the case of predators like tigers or leopards, where the elephant, the animal kills a person considering it's a prey, the elephant's case, it doesn't even matter. It's not.
So even if a female herd is trying to protect their child and they are aggressively marching towards humans, they are not trying to kill.
They're not.
They're just trying to push away.
To defend. Yeah.
And but I did read somewhere that like they try and go back and take revenge. Is it true?
No, that's part of another myth.
Masala.
Yeah.
But if someone has ever attacked them, they will remember and they will not go back to that place. Like you said, if somebody is trying to shoot,
they would try and avoid those
places.
Yes. But people also, I've had mahouts tell me that, elephants remember mahouts or individual people. Like if somebody's hurt an elephant tends to remember that and then be wary around that person and given a chance, charge at that person, for instance. So there are anecdotes about that also, which we cannot brush aside just like that.
Elephants are often associated with wisdom and compassion in various cultures, especially in India. And you are living in Sri Lanka. How is it there? How has witnessing their interactions up close, because I think you've had like the longest time interacting with them. You've been interacting with them since you were 3 years old. Whether in the wild or under human care, reinforced or challenged these age-old perceptions. What a tongue twister. Yeah. My mom, every time I call her, she would chant a mantra, which is about Lord Ganesha. And even yesterday when she was watching the movie, she was crying and praying and, she was very emotional. So what are your views on it? And after having spent such a long period of time, has it changed or being more reestablished, or how is it now?
I think we've always had this cultural association with elephants because of Lord Ganesha, particularly in India and parts of South Asia, where Lord Ganesha is like the remover of all obstacles, and you wouldn't start a new venture without offering your prayers to Lord Ganesha. So because of that, there's been a cultural idealism of elephants also. But to what extent that has really helped them in terms of their conservation is something I'm not sure about. Like, for instance, some communities still do have a lot of tolerance for elephants because of their association with Ganesha, or because of elephants being considered as gods themselves. But at the same time, you also see elephants being shot dead or being electrocuted or poisoned in the land of Ganesha.
What I can tell you is that wherever this conflict is not there, especially in North India, I can't imagine anyone talking bad about elephants. But yeah, especially where there is conflict, where they are actually getting into the fields, or like whatever the reason may be. It may be because of bad policies, it may be because of a rogue elephant, it may be because of what we are doing to the forest. There you may have that negative narrative, but in North, especially where I live, Delhi, Gurgaon, Lucknow, Jaipur, all these places, people wouldn't talk anything bad about elephants. We
So
really adore them and we worship them in a way.
I mean, that's really nice and interesting. But at the same time, I think it's important what the perceptions are of people who are having to face the brunt of living amidst elephants all through their lives. And it's those perceptions that really matter, because if somebody in Chhattisgarh, for instance, who's losing his or her livelihoods, 1 year's effort of growing crops for their livelihood, completely getting overturned by elephants overnight, still continues to have a positive attitude about elephants. That's something I would be really surprised about. But that's not the case, because of these major losses. People do have a negative perception about the species. Now, this is where the whole idea of coexistence comes into picture, and it's important we define what coexistence is also. Like, for instance, coexistence is not about being fine about having an elephant in my backyard. It's about having an elephant in or around places where I live, but with minimal losses to both sides, minimal losses to both people and to elephants. So, I mean, so you live, for instance, you live in Gurgaon. If there is a snake in your apartment or your house,
I won't be comfortable.
You won't be comfortable, exactly. And your first response would be to call the rapid response team or somebody who can rescue the snake and take it out of your apartment. If our immediate response is that way, imagine that of people who are having to share their spaces, their homes with tens and hundreds of elephants, which are large and potentially dangerous animals. So you cannot expect them to be comfortable and adhere to the norms of coexistence when their livelihoods and lives are at stake. So you can talk about coexistence only when you have measures put in place to mitigate the losses incurred by these communities and by the elephants. Those could be completely location specific. I mean, your interventions to mitigate conflict are highly landscape specific, and you need to understand the local landscape conditions to even suggest what mitigation measures could possibly work there. But that said, if not for those measures, we shouldn't even be talking about coexistence.
And what are those measures?
So, like I mentioned briefly during my initial introduction, the early warning systems in Valpare, for instance, has been an excellent example of how one can mitigate, particularly with emphasis to human deaths, human casualties, human injuries and deaths, about alerting people about elephant presence. Because very often, if you take any landscape for that matter, human deaths are a result of lack of knowledge about or lack of knowledge about elephant presence. When people are walking from bus stops back to their homes, or when they are early morning stepping out,
and they don't know there is an elephant
stepping
outside.
out to their crop fields, or they are going out in the nature to relieve themselves, or so on. So there are these unpredictable circumstances when you don't know where an elephant is. But if there was a mechanism to actually know whether there are elephants around or not in such areas, and another mechanism to intimate people about such kind of precise information about elephant presence, that would basically mitigate these accidents, these potential accidents that could happen in those areas. Which means, you are taking care of the larger problem of human deaths and casualties in those areas. Then what is your other problem here? Next problem is crop loss.
Crops.
So this is where we need to really answer a fundamental but very important question, which is, what is it that you need to do when you talk about a human-elephant conflict mitigation technique? Whether is it mitigating losses, or is it about keeping elephants inside forests? The larger idea has always been that of keeping elephants inside forests. But as far as I understand, the idea should be that of mitigating these losses and making sure livelihoods are not affected. Because you can never keep elephants inside forests. That's practically impossible. Let's talk basic maths. Let's say we are talking about 100 meter by 100 meter, a 1 hectare forested area. So what's the perimeter of fence that would be required? It's 400 meters, 100 meter, 100 meter, 100 meter, 100 meter. So you would require a 400 meter electric fence if you want to confine all your elephants within this 1 hectare. It's 1 hectare. Now let's talk about a few hundreds of thousands of square kilometers.
It's practically impossible.
Your perimeter of fence required would be humongous, which means your maintenance mechanisms are going to be extremely cumbersome, that it is highly likely, or it's highly likely to fail. It's bound to fail at some point or the other. There would be breaches at some point that elephants would use to cross over and come to the crop fields, eventually leading to the failure of the intervention. But what is it that you actually require? You want to keep elephants outside your crop fields and save your livelihoods. So if you have a fence just around your field, your fence, let's say you're going to have a field of, let's say, 1 hectare, which is 2.5 acres or 2.25 acres. So that's, on an average, that's the maximum land size that's going to be there for small size landholders. Even if it's going to be large size landholders, you can always just fence your area. So,
but then fencing it can also lead to animal deaths then.
No, these are DC fences that just gives you one power shock to deter the animal and not kill it. Unless these are illegal electric fences that are drawn from high tension lines that kill elephants. That is what is causing accidents.
Actually happening.
Yeah, that's what's actually happening in accidents.
Is it happening anywhere? India or Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, there are a lot of places where now villages are getting fenced. So villages have been requesting the government and non-governmental organizations.
And they not only save your crops from elephants, but from all animals.
From all animals, absolutely. And your maintenance cost becomes low because you only have so much fence. You can, as a family, you can just take care of the maintenance, as opposed to having a fence all around your forest perimeter,
which is managed by the state.
Because the state has multiple other priorities. The forest department
A state can always subsidize something like this.
They can always subsidize, absolutely. And we need to also understand the limitations of the forest department. And because the forest department's priority or forest department's only objective is not conflict mitigation. They have multiple other objectives, and conflict mitigation is only one of that. But right now, in many forest areas, you can actually see that this has become the topmost priority, that they are not able to focus on their other priorities. So taking care of this conflict management can actually help forest department to focus on their other priorities as well, which means you're also helping forest conservation at large by doing such pragmatic way of. So the underlying theory is that you're keeping elephants out of your farmlands and not inside forests.
Amazing. Brilliant point you made. So you are stationed in Sri Lanka right now, and which is a country, I don't know what percentage of their GDP comes from elephant tourism. And elephant tourism can be both a boon and a blessing and a curse, basically. How do you view it as someone who's studying elephants? What are your observations as to what can be done better to what the practices are right now? Even in India, when you go to a wildlife sanctuary, there are elephant rides, and there are a lot of things people go to, especially Mudumalai, just for the elephant camp. So what are the best practices from your experience that you'd like to share that can be promoted to ensure that these beings are treated with respect, love, and these should benefit both the elephant and the industry and the people?
I think, firstly, elephant rides are completely unethical because, the riding on elephant backs is definitely not a recommendable practice.
But it's happening in India, no?
It is.
And it's
because
happening through government portals.
they are. So that's something that needs to be curtailed completely, because there's a limit to which an elephant can bear weights, for instance, and for elephants to actually have these howdahs or the ambaris on top of them, the iron platforms, metal platforms, and then people sitting on top of it. I mean, if people are just sitting on bare elephant backs, it's still fine. But on top of these iron platform, I don't think it's recommended. It's not a great thing to do, and it needs to be regulated for sure. But in terms of elephant,
Regulated or completely stopped?
Completely stopped, and it needs to be phased out for sure. And in camps like Mudumalai and other places actually have a message to tell people, where you can communicate to people about the importance of having these rehabilitation centers. Like, for instance, we spoke about calves getting lost or abandoned earlier. In inevitable circumstances, if you're forced to bring these elephants into human care, these camps actually serve as excellent platforms to nurture them back to regular, normal life. And for tourists, this is something interesting to actually learn from. So these rehabilitation centers should actually form a model elephant tourism center where there's protected contact. So you can see the elephants, you can't touch or play with them, for instance. And, those are things that needs to be completely stopped. You can observe the mahout interacting with the elephant. You can observe elephants interacting with each other. All this can be made possible without from a safe distance, for instance. And at the same time, also provide emphasis on how, like, for instance, you also have a category of elephants called kunkis at these elephant camps, which are large, dominant male elephants that are used for driving away wild elephants from crop fields. So you can also talk about how elephants also do policing work, how these in rehabilitation centers.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there are interesting facts that you can share.
These aggressive elephants are controlled by certain mahouts, and they are the police.
Yeah, so they're not aggressive per se. They're dominant large bulls, and they have mahouts. And these elephants are trained to actually charge at wild elephants and drive them back into the forest.
Wow.
So,
how does it happen? Like, and these wild elephants won't charge back?
Which is why you have dominant males being used. So that basically deters the presence of wild elephants.
So they understand the signal from the mahout that now I have to charge at one of my own breed.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
So there are these interesting things that one can share, as the functions of a rehabilitation and elephant care center. And then you can also talk about the long history of how elephants actually came into captivity, how timber logging was important during the period of the East India Company. The railways required logs for sleepers, and it was the elephants that actually played a major role in sourcing all these logs. And so you can talk about all these historical aspects in a rehabilitation center without having any physical contact with an elephant. So you show an elephant, you show a lot of these things. You can probably also have,
So what you're saying is, in these rehabilitation centers, sensitization minus the riding and touching is all great.
It's absolutely fine. And you can also have some virtual reality or augmented reality shows where you can interact with an elephant, for instance.
And how is it in Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka, so like you rightly said, Sri Lanka's major source of income, I guess, comes from tourism in large.
Which is largely wildlife, and in wildlife also largely from elephant.
Yeah, I mean, they also have also have beach tourism and whale watching and things like that. In terms of their elephant tourism, it's largely around what they used to have, these congregation sites in North Central Province. And so used to, show people 200, 300 elephants at a time, things like that. But in terms of ethical elephant tourism practices in the wild, one thing I've always been bothered by is the number of people who are keen on getting charging photographs, for instance. So it's still, it's still something that a lot of people are excited about, to watch an elephant charge. There were complaints. I've heard about complaints. I've read about.
Then you will have to
problems.
instigate the animal.
Exactly. Drivers actually provoke elephants for their tourists to see charging.
This is in Sri Lanka.
No, in India. And this is something that one should be considerate about and then completely wipe off. We need to make people aware that the charging photograph of an elephant is actually bad. It actually means that the elephant is agitated. It actually means that the elephant was provoked. It actually means that the elephant's normal behavior was affected.
So, last question. What, according to you, is the most pressing concern when it comes to perception towards the elephants from people? Like, what, according to you, needs to change and now? And there is so much dialogue about climate change. How do you think, that is affecting the animal? Or is there something that you have observed over these so many years of studying that you'd like to share with people?
I'll split my answer into two parts. One is regarding the perception of people. I think media plays a major role in defining what people think about elephants. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there was this recent episode of a particular tusker being translocated in Kerala called the Arikomban.
No, I'm not
and
aware of it.
this elephant was translocated from, initially the order was to capture the elephant, but somebody actually went to court and got an order against the capture, and then then it was instructed to translocate the elephant elsewhere. And this whole thing was being live telecasted on media, and then social media was celebrating this. So wildlife management is not something to be celebrated about unless there are successful moments. Wildlife management decisions should not be public or media influenced. It should be science driven. And there needs to be more sensible reporting, sensitive and sensible reporting of instances like this. Like, for instance, calling elephants as rogues or murderers. This is all unethical, and it's a huge injustice to the species, because the elephants has never had an intention to kill someone.
Kill anyone.
There's been an accidental encounter and a person has lost his life. It's something to be sad about. And at the same time, you shouldn't tag the elephant as a rogue because that death happened. You're not even sure if this was the particular individual that was involved in this accident when you have multiple individuals using the same area. That is something one needs to really move forward to, people and media being careful about how they address elephants, how they report elephant conflict instances, and so on. And a lot of media platforms are also doing an excellent job in bringing out the other side of the story also, in terms of how the elephants are getting affected. And that's also equally appreciable. So, some amount of care in understanding how best one can report such stories can go a long way in building positive perceptions and attitudes towards the species. And to answer to your second part about climate change, it's a huge challenge that our current generation is actually having to face. And when it comes to elephant conservation, I think the biggest threat of climate change would be in terms of changes to habitat. I don't know if the elephant as a species is going to get immediate, like for instance, the polar bears, because of the ice melting and things like that, the polar bear is going to directly get impacted by climate change. But I don't know if as a species, if elephant would get directly impacted by climate change. But very importantly, the climate change has a major influence on the habitat quantity and quality for elephants, which is going to in turn affect elephant ecology and survival. So that way, I think it is linked to that way. Elephant lives are linked to climate change, and something we need to be, wary and careful and well planned about.
That makes a lot of sense, because I speak to this friend of mine who's a farmer, and she grows apples in the mountains. And this year it has just been raining, and it started raining 1 month in advance, and we've already recorded the highest amount of rain in last 10 years or so. And you've seen in the news also, Delhi's all flooded. So I'm sure these are things that directly impact us, and we already know, okay, this is happening. But we don't really know how it's going to impact the animal. I can go on. I have like 10 more questions, but I think we are short on time, and all the batteries are also going to drain out very, very soon. And you never know, the rain might come back with full force. Right now it has stopped. So while it has stopped, let's make a move. Sure. Thank you so very much for taking out time and spending your whole afternoon with me. And I got to learn so much, and I'm glad that we could do this, because the listeners will also get to learn something. So thanks, and I hope we can do this again. Thank
It
you
was
so
it
much,
was a
Sreedhar.
pleasure being on this podcast, Keshav. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure.